Inside, the church is a place of silence and tranquility. The thick sandstone walls block any passing sounds, just a hush and stillness, broken by the occasional ticking of the church clock. At weekends, the building hums to the sound of Sunday services and Saturday weddings, but visit any weekday and you will be pretty much on your own. Certainly God-fearing isn't what it used to be. In March 1621, John Dunmore, gentleman, applied to the then vicar, John Hatley, for grant of licences allowing the consumption of meat at a time of abstinence to Anne Dunmore, his wife, in her sickness. Can't quite see that sort of written request being sent in now. Someone once told me that going into a church and not making a short prayer was the same as going into someone's house and ignoring the owner. I like that. I'm not particularly religious, but I like it. Next to the entrance to the priest's room is the font. The font is known to have been in use here for at least 700 years. That's a lot of christenings. 40 generations of Wadhurst families must have passed by this font, whether at a baptism of their own, attending a family celebration, or just going about their daily business. Standing next to the font, you can almost physically sense a continuous and direct link to the building's past. Along the walls of the church, the nave, the chancel, north and south aisles are the names of some of the characters who formed that past. The monuments to the gentry of historic Wadhurst. To the right of the main door is a list of vicars of the church, stretching all the way back to Walter de Ertingen in 1313. Which would be a long way back for any normal church, but nothing too unusual here. Many of the old churches in this part of the world have a list of vicars, and most of those lists go back a very long way. But if you hunt for the name de Ertingen in a phone book or punch it into Google, it turns out that this name appears nowhere else in the world except in reference to this church. Must have been the last of the line. A vow of abstinence too far. Running your eye down the list of the 50 odd vicars, one name immediately stands out from the rest. The name James Wilcock, and after his name, in brackets, the word intruded. James Wilcock was vicar at the church at a time when the population of the town must have been no more than 1,000 people. A tight little community. And the long and the short of it is that the people didn't want him here. In 1647, with the English Civil War virtually over, and with Charles I seized and ready for execution, the parliamentarians came to power. With Cromwell at their head, the backbone of the parliamentarian forces was the Puritans, and having gone to the trouble of fighting a civil war, burning the odd witch and killing a king, sending a priest into a community to run their own kind of church services wasn't that much of a big deal. So in 1647, James Wilcock was foisted, or intruded, onto an unhappy parish, because he was a man prepared to take services in accordance with Puritan rites. Probably seemed a good career move at the time, but these rites were about as palatable to a Church of England congregation then as mixing Protestants and Catholics had been 100 years earlier. It can't have been much fun in a small rural community in 1647 when nobody particularly wanted you to be there. He can't have had much of a social life. But for 15 years, Wilcox faithfully soldiered on. On his death in 1662, the reward for his years of service? A black marble slab right up there in front of the altar. And as a thank you for his efforts, inscribed by the people of the town for all eternity and for everyone to see, here lies James Wilcox, indignissimus hujus loci minister. Or, here lies James Wilcock, most unworthy minister of this place. Most unworthy minister of a church almost 1,000 years old. It takes someone with a proper grudge to carve that on your tombstone. They really didn't like him. Above the altar, lighting up Wilcox's tomb, the east window of the chancel is filled with stained glass from the Victorian era. Architecturally, this is perhaps Wadhurst Church's crowning glory. Lit by the morning sun, its colours reflect around the pews. The glass was donated by the parishioners and friends of the Reverend John Foley in memory of his 40 years' service to the church. Typically, the windows of Wadhurst Church are a simple Gothic design, with nothing to immediately catch your eye. Except perhaps for the other major stained window to the west of the font. Depicting Christ among the children, this window is in memory of one Olive Maud Roberts. Olive Luck was born in Wadhurst on the 11th of October 1876, the daughter of Frederick and Fanny Luck. As a child, she would have known of Albert Roberts, also born locally, but 6 years her senior. When Albert was in his early 20s, he migrated to Canada to seek his fortune, and eventually settled into a place in Alberta, a town called Red Deer. A beautiful place, also today's equivalent of the middle of absolutely nowhere. In November of 1894, Albert purchased just over 260 acres of land from the Canadian Pacific Railway, close to the settlement of Red Deer. He paid $3 an acre for the land, and subsequently he prospered. After 3 years of building up his new home, Albert returned to Wadhurst to find an English bride to take back with him to Canada. He was reintroduced to Olive Luck, and after a short courtship persuaded her to marry him. The ceremony took place on the 27th of July 1898 at Wadhurst Church. Almost immediately, the couple returned to Canada, and in 1899 Olive was overjoyed to find herself carrying their first child. On the 28th of July 1899, a year and a day from her wedding, Olive was taken to the town of Calgary, where she gave birth to her son, Harold Luck Roberts. Sadly, it wasn't to be. Harold died after just a few short hours of life. At the age of only 23, Olive was far from home, overwhelmed by grief, and desperately ill. 4 days later, on the 2nd of August 1899, Olive died from complications related to the birth. In just 1 short week, all of Albert's plans and dreams for his family future were shattered. Unable to bear life in Canada on his own, the broken-hearted Albert returned home to Wadhurst. Here, as a sign of his love, he dedicated the stained glass window in the west wall to Olive's memory. Albert died at the age of 66 in Nice in the south of France.